And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another video on rook endgames. I have to apologize for probably boring you to death with all of those finesses in those rook endgames, but today I want to show you why it is important to study them, because I just was browsing through all of the ongoing tournaments and I was looking at one closed GM tournament in the Czech Republic, and there was a game which actually did have this rook endgame, which I just published a video about some 2 days ago. And two pretty strong international masters were playing against each other. And this position, which you see right here, was what appeared in the game. Black was completely lost in the middle game, but then somehow managed to save himself into this rook endgame, and now it was actually a draw. If you didn't see the previous video, which I did on those rook and bishop's pawn against just king and rook, make sure to check that one out. I will repeat some of the information in this video as well, but I want to show you just another example on how not to play this specific endgame and how you could save a draw right here, because spoiler alert, black was not able to save a draw here. Which, I mean, obviously it is always easier to say when you are analyzing it, and the game was already at this point lasting some 65 moves. Players are tired, it's normal to not see every single detail, but I think there are a few rules, a few moves which you could probably have played better if you would have watched the previous video which I made on this specific endgame. So here Roshka played the move rook h4 check, which is not a mistake specifically, I would say, but I do think that the immediate move rook h1 would maybe have been a little bit more precise immediately, just getting ready to start giving checks on b1 right away. But okay, he gave a check on h4, provoked c4, and then went rook h1, so that he will have also checks once the king is on the c file. The king cannot easily hide anymore. Rook b6 check, normal idea, king c7, and now rook g6. And I think that this was already an instructive moment when you could again follow one of the rules which I have provided in the previous video, or which Sam Shankland has provided through his fantastic book, and which I presented in the previous video. Roshka played the move rook h5, which again is not the decisive mistake yet, but I think it's a step towards the wrong direction, because instead, I think that king b7 here would have been a nice way to play this. And getting ready that after a6, there is always king a7. Because as we saw in the game, if after a6, king a7 is not possible, then it can get quite close. Here, I think there's nothing really that white can, nothing significant that white can try anymore, because there are just going to be checks whenever the king comes to c5, and a6 is going to be weak. I've analyzed king b5, and now again, if you paid close attention to my last video, you will know how to react here. Give a check on b1 and then immediately return to h1 with the rook. And now also the benefit of having the king on b7 is that now after this check, again, we all know that now that going to the last rank would be a decisive mistake, because if the king is cut off on the last rank, then it's always lost. But instead, king a6 saves the game. Again, like previously, the pawn on a5 is now weak, and now black is very close to actually saving the draw objectively. Again, here it is completely drawish. Roshka played the move rook h5. As I said, not a mistake specifically, but I do believe a step into the wrong direction. You want to keep this rook on h1. Obviously, it made sense so to stop the king from coming to the 5th rank. But after the move a6, now black had to retreat with the rook. This was a critical moment. After the move Roshka played, rook f5, keeping the king cut off, now it is lost already. Instead, rook h1 was still enough to draw, and after rook g7 check, king b6, a7. Now to go for rook b1 check, king c3, and now important rook a1. And the funny thing is that in the game, we reached a very, very similar position, just that white had this rook on e7, and there is some pretty important point which we will discuss, which we didn't discuss in the previous video. That's why I also wanted to show you guys this game. If rook e7 now comes, then king c5 makes a draw. This is an important move, just stopping the white king from entering. The thing is here with the rook on g7, if white goes for king d4, black can give a check. And now since the rook is not on e7, white does not have the idea of king e6, king f7, or also king d7. And now black can just take the pawn on a7, and then it is an easy draw. And now, as we will see, in the game, Roshka played rook f5. Now rook g7 check, king b6, a7. He was able to come up with this nice trick rook b5 check here. Idea being that if white takes, then it's stalemate, which is actually quite funny. Like usually with only this pawn being on b5, it's a more common idea, but I've never seen it with the pawn also being on a7, but obviously it doesn't make a difference. It's anyway a stalemate. But white played king c3. Obviously white doesn't need to take, and now black is losing because after rook a5, king d4, rook a1. It is kind of a similar position like earlier, but it is white to move, and now white can play the move rook e7. And now after black starts giving checks in this position, if black continues checking, which didn't happen in the game, now there is the move king d7, and if, well, black cannot take because the rook on e1 is hanging. If there's another check, then there is king c8, and white is winning. The pawn is just promoting very quickly. So in the game, rook d8 was played, but now rook d7 and king d6, and the king went back to d4. And at some point, white was able then to find the correct breakthrough right here. Now king a5 was played and king a6, and now it is unstoppable because white will get rook b7 followed by rook b8. And yeah, now rook b5 was important not to allow checkmate. Now there's rook a5, and after rook f8, rook b8. So just a quick reminder, this will probably be my last video on this specific endgame, but I thought it was nice to discuss here. Just always try to follow this rule, go back to h1. I think that already here it was quite tricky, so that's why I said earlier, I think that king b7 is probably an easier defense. And it's good to know, I was not really aware that this specific position with pawn on a6, if white has the idea to play rook g7 check followed by a7, that this already can become really, really tricky. So that's why it would be much nicer to keep the king on b7 in this position. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to see more of me, make sure to head to the video description down below. You can check out my courses, my other social media stuff as well. Let me know if you want to see more on rook endgames, which one specifically. This will be actually my 6th episode on specific rook endgames. Probably there are more videos on there already. If there are any specific ones which you would like to see, let me know, and I will see you guys soon.